Okay, so now we're going to take a look at graphing function tables. So when graphing equations, there are many different ways to graph an equation. We're going to look at how to graph equations using function tables. So the first step is to complete the table and determine the coordinates. So this is the part where you fill out the table. You take the x you're given, substitute it, do the math, and get a y. Or you pick your own x, substitute, do the math, get a y. So first step is actually complete the table. Second thing you're going to do is once you complete the table, you get your points, your x and y coordinates, and you plot those points. And the third thing you do is connect those points to make a line. Now remember, with equations, they create solid lines. Okay, the points we have on the table are just the ones we put in the table. There are many, many points in between all of those. So once you're finished with the points you get, you connect the dots to make a line. Let's just jump in and get started. So sometimes when you're asked to graph using a table, you don't have a lot of room for your work. So what we're going to do is I see my equation up top and I see the x values that I have to use, but I don't have enough room to actually do my work here. So underneath, I'm actually just going to make my own table. Now, one thing to note, this equation starts with an f that has an x in parentheses. That would be called f of x is the way that it's said when you look at this. It actually means the same thing as y. It's the function of x, f of x. The function of x is equal to y. You just need to know that they're interchangeable. It's talking about the same thing. So they give me x's. My first x is -5. We'll substitute into the equation. Remember, the x is getting replaced. So this negative sign on the outside stays on the outside. And instead of an x, I'm going to put -5. Now this is the hardest it's going to get. Really won't get much harder than this today. So I wanted to include this in the example. But be careful with this negative sign. You can imagine it like -1x. -1 times -5. Okay, so just be careful with the notation. If I have a negative times a negative, imagine this is -1. -1 times -5 is 5. 5 plus 3 is 8. So my y value will be 8. Next up is -3. Can follow my same pattern that I did in -5, and I have -1 times -3 plus 3. -1 times -3 is 3. 3 plus 3 is 6. X equals -1. Follow my same pattern when substituting. I get negative times x. -1 times -1 is 1 plus 3. I get 4. And then go ahead, I'm out of room, but you go ahead and complete the rest of that table on your own. Hit pause, complete that table, and then we'll see what you get. You should have gotten 2 when x equals 1, y equals 2. And when x equals 3, y equals 0. So now we're going to plot our points. The top number is my x value, the bottom is my y value. Now one thing to note on your graph here, everything doesn't go by ones. If you notice, my y-axis goes by twos. So be careful. So my first ordered pair is negative 5, 8. Negative 5, 8. And if you want to take up a little more room, you can always write your ordered pairs, or you can just graph them from the table. Then we have negative 3, 6. Negative 1, 4. 1, 2. 0, 3. Connect your points. And it should make a line. Now you do want to include arrows at the end of your line because this is going to go on forever. So remember, we connect these points because just because it's not on our table doesn't mean it's there. There are actually ordered pairs in between along this entire line. So many ordered pairs that together they make a line. If I gave you x equaled negative 2, there would be a point right here that would match. Okay. X is 0, there would be a point right here that matches. You only have to plot the points you got from the table, but when you connect them, you make a line. The other thing to note, if you happen to have a point out on the side somewhere that doesn't seem to fit, there's a problem. This should be a straight line. There should be no curves, no bends, no twists. It should be a perfectly straight line. If you can't get a perfectly straight line, sorry about that. If you can't get a perfectly straight line, there's a problem with your ordered pairs. Usually you'll see, for example, you'll see things going in a pattern, and then all of a sudden there's one out to the side. Well, if these all follow a pattern here, and then this guy's out in La La Land, this one may be the problem. Double check your math. Double check that you plotted the point right. Those are the two things that happen. Either your math is wrong or you plotted it wrong. Let's look at another. Okay, so for our next graph, we have 3x minus 6. We have our table here. And again, there's not enough room, so below the problem, make yourself a table. X values, write your equation, and our y. So our first x is 0. We'll go ahead and substitute the 0 in for the x. Simplify, we do our multiplication first. I get 0 minus 6. 0 minus 6 is negative 6. Now, you may want to add the opposite on everything here. I would definitely suggest you do that. At this point, it's up to you. Now, one thing I'm going to do, copy it down correctly here, but I'm going to make an error just because I want you to see something in the end. I'm going to pretend that I made some sort of multiplication mistake and I get negative 3 as my answer. So remember, this is going to be an error. We're going to see what happens on the graph because I want you to visualize what an error looks like and how to handle it. So let's look at our next number. So technically this is negative 6, but we're going to call it negative 3 for now. Okay. We have 2, so we'll substitute a 2. Now do not skip the step where we write out the work, like this second little part here. Every student that is struggling, and I look at their chart and they are doing work in their head, the work is wrong. It has nothing to do with your brain. It's that right now there's so much new information. Our brains aren't calculators, okay? Take it step by step. Don't expect your brain to do too much at once. In time, you can, but right now, just take it slow. The time to have this extra step is going to save you time with errors. So 6 plus negative 6 is 0. when x is 3, I get 9 plus negative 6 is 3. I want you to go ahead and hit pause and complete the rest of this table on your own with x equals 4 and x equals 5. So hit pause, complete the table, come back and we'll finish. So you should have gotten 6 for y when x is 4, and when x is 5, y is 9. So we're going to go ahead and plot these points. Now remember, we have an error here, but we're just going to go with it. Well, I'm going to go with it. You can plot the correct one, or you can just wait on that one. So 0, negative 3, 2, 0, 3, 3, 4, 6, and 5, 9. Now what you may notice already is these 4 points are in a nice little line, and then this guy's kind of out to the side. Let's take a look for a second at what that's going to look like. Now, if I draw my line through these points that are in common here, this guy on the side is a problem. Okay. Another way you can look at this is if I try to make my line through these two, it misses all of these. Now, you can assume one line I had 1 point out of whack. This line, I have 3 points out of line. There's a good chance that that 1 point is the problem, not those 3 points. So usually if you've got one line that's weird, or 1 point that's weird, that point is a problem. So we can assume that this is the correct line, which makes this an incorrect point. So whenever you have a point that's off, doesn't look right, you can't bend the line, you can't twist the line, you can't curve the line. These are straight lines. So that means one of two things. You plotted the point wrong, or your math is wrong. So the first thing to check is, did you plot it correctly? A lot of times that's just the issue. So double check, 0, negative 3. 0, negative 3. I plotted it right, so that means the math is wrong. So what I'm going to do is I'll erase my point. I'm going to come back to my math and I'm going to double check it. I substituted correctly, but I multiplied wrong. That is supposed to be 0. If this is 0, that makes this negative 6, which makes this negative 6. Let's plot that point and see what happens. 0, negative 6. That's on the line, so I know I'm good. Use the graph as a way to check your work. If something is off, that means it's wrong. Double check your math for that point. You don't have to check everything. Check the one that looks weird. If you can't tell which one is weird, as long as you have, if we're plotting 5 points, that gives you a good amount of points to kind of check yourself with. Okay, if you have a couple that are off, go double check the math. It's as easy as that. Okay, the next one. 3 plus 2x is our equation. This one's actually pretty easy. So we have y equals 3 plus 2x. Now what I want you to do is I'll start this with you. We'll do the first one together, and you'll do the rest on your own. So I have 3 plus 2 times negative 4. Don't forget your order of operations. Multiply first. 3 plus negative 8 is negative 5. Now, if you want, while you're working, you can plot the points, or you can get the whole table done and then plot points. What I'm going to have you do is I want you to pause and I want you to complete the table first. I'll show you the table results and then we'll plot together. If you want to do it all, you can, but check back in and see how you did. So we should have negative 2, When x is negative 3, y is negative 2. I'm sorry, hold on. That's wrong. When x is negative 3, y is negative 3. When x is negative 2, y is negative 1. When x is negative 1, y is positive 1. And when x is 0, y is 3. If you didn't get any of these, go back and check your math. Now, when we're graphing, there's one thing that happens with this graph that could happen to you, so it's good to handle. My first ordered pair here is negative 4, negative 5. So I go back to negative 4, and I try to find negative 5. But if you look, my y-axis goes by 2s. That doesn't mean you can't graph it, just means that we have to think a little bit more. If you need to, go through and add some tick marks for the odd numbers. Okay, negative 5 is going to be between negative 4 and negative 6. So right here will be negative 5. So negative 4, negative 5 will be right there. Negative 3, negative 3, negative 3, negative 3. Negative 2, negative 1, negative 2, negative 1. So my odds are in between grid marks. Negative 1, 1, 0, 3. And it looks like I have a nice line here. Let's double check it. And that's it. The lines, the points all match up, and we're good to go. That's all.